Let's talk about coping with grief and loss in Sailor Moon.
Yeah, I mean, we see multiple layers of it, right? We see some generational grief in that Queen Serenity had to sort of give up her child, right? We see grief in that Serena or Usagi, depending on which version you were introduced to, finds out that she's essentially adopted. And so there's a grief of identity there.
My favorite Sailor Scout is Sailor Saturn. She not only represents a planet, but she also has the opportunity to destroy planets, and she has the opportunity to reset things because she symbolizes death, rebirth, and regeneration. And I think that was the first time that I've ever seen a show or, any sort of story go that deep into the meaning of life, right? And I think that makes her more of a neutral guardian, because even though grief is something that is so hard to deal with.
Ariel and Stefanie, welcome to Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so let's get started with this. What are some highs and lows from the last week?
Okay, so for me, some highs. I got my homework done on Sunday for what's due this week, so I have the week off, essentially.
For those of you who don't know, Ariel has gone back to school to get her PhD.
Yes, PsyD. Yeah.
PsyD. That's so cool. Go ahead.
Yeah. Lows, I have been very mindful of eating the leftovers in our fridge to not have food waste. And yet this Sunday, I had to throw away a big thing of mangoes that went bad, and that stunk.
Where does that come from, like needing to eat the leftovers, out of curiosity?
So currently, the roommates and I have all decided that we want to be mindful of our spending, and it can be very easy to spend money on groceries that you don't eat. And then two, my partner and I have a lot of desire to engage in a sustainable lifestyle. So the house has solar panels. We have a compactor. Or what do you call it? When you turn things into dirt. Come on, Steph.
A trash compactor?
What is the word? No, it's not for trash. It's for compost. That's it.
Yes, a compost.
Yeah,
a compost.
So we have a composter that I actually funded on Kickstarter that turns everything into compost within 24 hours.
Wow.
And then he also works a sustainability team. He's part of a few different unions in the entertainment industry, and has a few different jobs, and he works with a sustainability team where they find organizations to take the crafty food. They find ways to have solar panels on set, things like that.
Yeah. Side note, there's a really great app that I recently discovered. I don't know if y'all have heard of it, called Too Good To Go.
No, I haven't.
Oh,
tell us more.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Ariel said yes, she does.
Yeah, is that the one where you can get pastries at a donut shop at the end of the night that they're going to throw away?
Yeah, so it's not just donuts now. It's tacos, it's supermarkets. I live in East LA area. And so there's some mom and pop shops that they got to sign up, and some Japanese markets will have food that needs to be thrown away, but they don't want to throw it away. So they'll sell it for maybe $3.99. And it's just a bag full of food that you can get for cheap. And so I wish I had this in college. I was $5 for a whole bag of food. I would survive. But it started actually with donut shops, with Chipotle. I think Chipotle. I think it's actually California Fish and Chicken Grill as well, the Sharkies. So it's the best.
That's awesome. I definitely have to look into that.
Yeah, it's called Too Good To Go. We're not a sponsor. I wish we were. Otherwise, we would make money from it. But Stefanie, what are your highs and lows from this week?
Man, I had such a busy week last week. It's one of the busiest weeks of the school year for me. Me and a couple of my colleagues who are Asian American and Pacific Islander, we put together an AANHPI night market festival every year for our school community. And it was on Friday,
Wow.
and it's our third year doing it, and it was super successful. We had about 350 people come in our campus at Historic Filipino Town, and we had probably like 6 to 7 vendors, including parent volunteers that host country booths. So we had like a Vietnam booth, a Thailand, Japan, China,
Wow.
Filipino. We had performers. We had Filipino folk performers. We had taiko drummers. We had lion dancing. And one of my good friends, DJ Wendy, she is a longtime member of the community. I was one of her kids' teachers associates. She DJs for us every year. And yeah, it was huge, but it's a big undertaking, and I'm still recovering from that. So both a high and a low, because my body is exhausted. And labor of love, definitely. I love doing these things, but as event organizers, like, you don't eat. And if you
No,
do, you're
you
like
don't.
forcing yourself to eat and drink. So I had like my full boba that like I didn't finish. I had, I ate 1 lumpia out of like the 6 that I had because I was making sure everyone else was fed. And I have all those leftovers in my fridge right now. So looking forward to that. But that was Friday. And then Saturday, I took my son to see Monster Jam for his birthday. So that was a whole thing, an event at SoFi Stadium. And Sunday, I don't know what happened. I think I tried to rest, but it's we're chugging along here.
I
so
love
definitely
that.
very, very highs, but I'm ready to rest.
Very,
a little
very
bit.
high highs. It kind of reminds me of a wedding. Like, it reminds me of, like, I recently attended one. That's why it's so top of mind for me, where that's why brides have a bridesmaid to remind them to eat when they're entertaining other people. And I feel like there should be an event planner assistant that you should have had just to remind you to like take care of yourself, or to have like an extra scrunchie lying around here and there.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, that was my husband halfway through the event. He got there, luckily found parking because I had to move a couple people. But he was the one who was like, "Did you eat yet? Let me get you food." And he got it for me. And he got it for some of my friends too, who were just stuck at the booth, not moving. So he was very helpful. I'm very thankful for that.
Oh, Stefanie, your husband sounds so intentional.
We've been together for a very long time. I hope that is a lived experience.
If y'all are listening via audio, Ariel was nodding her head while Stefanie was talking and saying they've been married for a very long time.
Yes, very long time.
So how long have the two of you known each other?
Well, I will also point out that I think part of the intentionality is because of his name.
Yeah. What's his name?
His name is also Ariel.
That's
and so is my son, actually. So many Ariels in my life.
Oh, that's so cool.
And my father-in-law too. Yeah, he's actually the third.
That's so synchronicity like. Like all of your life is full of Ariels.
Truly. And we have a Disney podcast, so we just attract what we love.
Yeah. So just so people get to know you, Stefanie and Ariel, how long have the two of you known each other? How did you meet? And why the need for this podcast? Just do some shameless plugs.
We have now known each other. I think so. We both met at our previous employer at a grocery store, and we happened to have gotten hired at the same time. I want to say 2014.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. 2014. Yeah. So good. Oh my gosh. Is it our 10-year anniversary this year?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Oh my gosh. Happy anniversary, Ariel. I love you.
Oh, happy anniversary. I love you.
Yeah. So, we worked together. We were baristas and bakers, essentially. We served coffee, made juice, baked bread at this grocery store. And we just found that we had a lot in common. And it was just not really like intentional, but through conversation, through working with each other, I don't think I ever recall a time that it was difficult to work with Ariel. It was just, we had fun doing what we did.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We had a lot of times like gabbing At the time, Steph was going back to school. I had just finished school and was working on like my hours for internship. So we commiserated over like various stressors, not just part of the job. And then we also really connected in regards to like the passions we had, both loving Disney, going to Disneyland. Steph like reintroduced Disneyland to me as like an adult.
Wow.
And then of course the synchronicity, like her husband at the time being named Ariel and me having the name Ariel. And he also worked part-time at another grocery store in the same chain. So we would go to like different food events that like we could get passes for working at this grocery store. And then for the podcast, we it's Happiest Pod on Earth, and we talk about how to use Disney in educational mental health settings. And we were, I guess you'd say, like handed down or gifted the podcast from Geek Therapy, which is a nonprofit. And they have their network of podcasts. And the original hosts wanted the podcast to keep going, but they didn't have the capacity to keep going at it. And at the same time, we presented at the first TAGS Therapeutic Applied Geek and Gaming Summit. And that is an online convention that provides CEs on using geek and gaming culture and therapy. And we did a presentation on the evolution of the Disney princess. So then the two hosts like essentially came up to us and were like, would you like to be the host of the podcast moving forward, given that you obviously like Disney?
Wow.
Yeah, it was very fast. I was like, this is happening. And all of a sudden it was like, and at this time we weren't working at the grocery store anymore. We had kind of gone to our respective careers and we just hung out to eat and have fun, go to conventions for fun with each other. And it all just kind of came together. And now we have this podcast that has, I think, brought us even more together. And we, have really aligned on the goals that we want to set for ourselves and how we want to present ourselves as professionals. So it's been a blessing for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of chemistry between the two of you. Like one of my really good friends is a cinematographer, and they talk a lot about just being able to analyze how people work together and communication being a really big part of a film set. And just having that context, like the two of you talking to each other, I can tell that you're really good friends. And, the topic that we're going to cover today is just about Sailor Moon Rugrats. And then we're also talking about Pokemon. And so we're going to get to that in just a few moments. But what do you think? Because you're both, like Ariel, you have a partner, and Stefanie, you're married. How do you think being friends with each other has added to your view of relationship, and why? It's really, I'm assuming that it's really important for your mental health to keep really healthy relationships.
Well, I'd say for me, I had the experience of having a military dad. So I didn't have an area that I would consider like this is home, with the exception of San Diego, because my grandma lived there all my life. And so living in Los Angeles is probably the longest I've ever stayed in one area, in one space. So I've been able to have a long-term friendship with Steph. But personally for me, and I've told Steph this like in private a few times, was because I'm white passing, I may be Filipino, but people see me, they see a white girl. I didn't have a lot of connection with my Filipino side. And my parents divorced and I live with my dad. He was a white dad. So everything I learned about being Filipino was like if I Googled something. And I lived in spaces where I was the person of color. Like I graduated at a high school where there was 12 students total. So such a small town. And then meeting Steph like has introduced me to a whole part of my identity that mattered to me, but I didn't have access to, if that makes sense. And so for me, that's where our relationship grew, because she's so keyed into her identity and the connection with the community, and that like opened the door and like the way that I was thinking and filled parts of me that were filled with grief and sadness, now lots of joy.
Yeah, and for me, I think it was kind of like two pieces of like a puzzle, right? Where Ariel felt that she wanted to find out more about her identity. I was so embedded in this second generation, Filipino household. All my friends are pretty much almost Filipino, but because working and living in Los Angeles, you're introduced to so many different enclaves and diverse people. I was wanting to reach out and see what else was possible for me, because I definitely struggled with going beyond the stereotypical, be a nurse and, be a doctor, be an engineer. I was always yearning for something more creative, and not many of my friends or family were in the creative space. And being friends with Ariel and seeing her embrace her creativity, always looking for new opportunities to do that, really empowered me to be able to be like, yeah, I definitely think I can do this. I can dive into the deep end where I don't have anybody guiding me, but yet I have a friend along the way who's willing to take those risks with me. And I think that, was kind of the complement to, our journeys together.
And so, like, Stefanie, you're in the education space. Ariel, you're in the mental health space. And are there intersecting ideas when it comes to education and mental health that you think have added to your professions just by being friends with each other?
I think we see so many similarities.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I think one thing that we have learned is that mental health professionals and teachers need to collaborate more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know how many times they should missing out on IEPs and how to implement them. Like it, and the barriers, like the way that Stef has described some of like the political barriers, some of the social barriers, like of each different role within the school system. It's given me a lot of empathy towards that job.
Yeah. And for people listening that don't know what an IEP is, IEP stands for
Individualized Education Plan. So basically, I work for a very inclusive school. So a lot of kiddos who do have IEPs are just in general ed classes, from TK all the way to 8th grade. And a lot of the things that I have noticed, have experienced in the classroom, having, somebody from, the mental health space, somebody from the special education space was crucial, because I don't think my classroom could function without those supports. And I think that, as Ariel said, mental health, clinicians and people in that field and teachers, anybody in the education space, really, the collaboration is nothing but fruitful, because you're really knowing how to serve the whole child. And that means every single part of the child, mental, physical, everything that they need, socioeconomic, depending on where you are. And I work in a public school, so I have a lot of kiddos who don't have access to that. And, seeing the stories that Ariel tells me, or which can tell me, is very similar to one-on-one conversations I've had with my students, whether or not they were in my classroom, just in passing, asking, hey, how are you? Getting to know them, especially if you've been working at a school for X amount of years, you grow up with these kids. And, learning how to address their needs because you're an adult that they trust really takes a lot of, scope, and widening that scope could only help them.
That's so interesting, because I was, my very first internship was with LUSD, and I was in East LA, was the first school. It was an elementary school that I was stationed in, and an IEP is so helpful for so many children that grow up in socioeconomically poverty-stricken neighborhoods that, like, I have that context, but now listeners have that context to where both of you are coming from. And so Ariel and Stefanie are not just coming from this from a entertainment standpoint, but I think using your individual professions, we're weaving in mental health themes using entertainment. And I think that's actually really, really powerful. Now, let's dive into the big topic of friendship, grief, and empowerment through Sailor Moon. And let's go into it. So for those of you who don't know, Linda Yoon actually loves Sailor Moon, the founder and co-director of Yellow Chair Collective. And so I'm excited for her to listen to this and to watch this. But how do the themes of friendship, group dynamics, and coping with grief and loss in Sailor Moon contribute to characters' mental health resilience and emotional growth?
Where do we start?
I do want to ask this question because recently, in the last coming years, the word resilience has been under attack since the NPR article surrounding the word resilience for people of color. I'd love for you to address that concern before we go into this, because I think that that's also important, using the verbiage and language we're using as well.
When it comes to resilience, Unfortunately, the way that it is been presented and expected of BIPOC individuals or the global majority, as some people have decided to coin the group, is that that will just make things better. And there's a certain breaking point when it comes to always being strong. One, it means you don't get the chance to feel softness, which means you don't get the chance to feel comfort or safety. The other component is that resilience is supposed to be a ability to bounce back from typical stressors, but systemic oppression, it's not a typical stressor. It's a targeted stressor. A typical stressor would be like a bad day, not having to live every single day, with a model minority myth for pressure, or not having to live every single day trying to keep yourself small in order to make other people feel more comfortable around you, or not raise your voice, or be compared to what someone's stereotype is. So I think it's important for us because we're noting that when we say mental resilience, we're talking about the ability to find inner strength and maybe even generational strength, but not in comparison to continued oppression. That shouldn't be included in the equation. That needs to be removed. Your ability to experience resilience just means that you might have fostered some tools that allow you to feel stronger within your day.
That was so beautifully said.
Yes. I don't know how I can follow up with that. But when I think about kids and resiliency, every kid starts at such a different part of experience. Even if you have a bunch of 5-year-olds come in and start kindergarten, they have a myriad of experiences in those 5 years that contribute to how they react to each other, act towards the teacher, act to, different stressors like asking how to spell something or asking how to do a simple equation. And all of these things are still developing in them. So I don't think resilience could be measured yet in kids like that. And even if so, it's so circumstantial, and you really have to be very careful in how you observe these kids and know that sometimes what they're going to do one day is completely different what they do another day. So even though there's something that they maybe find difficult is something that they're working towards, they might get to it tomorrow. They might get to it next week. They might get to it in a month. Maybe it won't get there until next year. But I think expecting that from children really is a level of not understanding exactly, what makes the whole child and what also contributes to the growth of that child. And in a space that's safe and comforting for them to be able to make mistakes, be vulnerable with themselves and the adults around them so that they can achieve, the highest growth possible.
So beautiful. I love how you're both tackling it from different angles too. Like I can definitely see the thread of mental health and education weaved into how you define resilience. Because even Stefanie, the example you used of like different 5-year-olds will enter into a situation with different standpoints and different levels of equity. And then Ariel, you tackled it from a very systemic view, which is very much so like a cultural competence way of seeing things as a therapist. But let's move into Sailor Moon, because Sailor Moon was, I think, before I entered into a TV obsession. I think it was like I'm in my mid-20s, and I think it was before. So give context to like for you, Ariel and Stefanie, like what was Sailor Moon like for both of y'all, and like why is it so significant for your own cultural implications? And by cultural, I mean media.
I mean, it was the first time I saw a different sort of animation style on TV. All the animation styles I was used to was, Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse. Nothing that was, very resemblant of something that I liked. I love those things too, don't get me wrong. But this was so much more relatable because they were teenage girls, something that I wasn't quite yet, but I was looking up to become. I have a lot of older cousins, and I am the eldest in my family. So I always looked up to my older ates in middle school and high school with their long hair and makeup, and they would listen to R&B and cool things, and I'm like, oh man, I want to be like that one day. And this is around the same time that I discovered Sailor Moon because it would air before I went to school. So I think the animation they were made up. They turned from schoolgirls into these beautiful, warriors, but they weren't like superheroes. It didn't look like Wonder Woman, something I've seen before. They were much more softer in feature. They all looked different. They all had colored hair, which was so cool. So I definitely, the visual to me was just nothing I've ever seen before. And that's what really, got me hooked onto it.
Yeah, you light up like a little kid, Stefanie, when you talk about it.
I
It's
know,
so cool.
'cause I still love it.
I love that. It's kind of like me when I talk about Drake and Josh or like Fairly Odd Parents. Like that's what it was like for me. And it's so cool to just hear how different shows affect different people. But what about for you, Ariel?
Yeah, so a part of it was the fact that it was a girl superhero group. And at the time, I was only exposed to superhero groups where maybe one or two people were girls. So like if I think of like Captain Planet, or if I think of Power Rangers, the leader definitely wasn't a woman or a girl. And it wasn't a whole gang of them. Every once in a while, Tuxedo Mask comes in and throws a rose here and there, to distract or do something. But the person who saves the day is usually Sailor Moon or one of the scouts. The other component was the banging intro. Loved the song. Gotta I think for cartoons, for me, intro was it. And then
yes,
I think the other component, Steph has pointed out the soft features that these women were able to fight in a feminine way. We saw them emote, and when I think of, and we've talked about this in the evolution of the Disney princess, the way that we saw strong women is they had to emulate masculine features. So the first strong princess woman that we were introduced to was Mulan, and it was because she fought like a man, literally dressed like a man.
Yes.
Whereas Sailor Moon and her scouts, Jupiter is strong and buff, and she loves to cook. And they check in with each other. All the scouts call each other. They actually hug each other. And we saw even Sailor Moon's compassion being the reason that she's defeated so many of her opponents. And we don't get a lot of portrayals of what's seen as feminine strength. And I think I really resonated with that because I'm very short. I am not physically strong, but I am good at yelling.
I love it. Okay, let's break down the question really quick. So we just tackled friendship, we tackled group dynamics, and now I think let's talk about coping with grief and loss in Sailor Moon, because I think that we've built a really strong foundation there. But tell me more about how grief and loss is portrayed in this show.
Yeah, we see multiple layers of it, right? We see some generational grief in that Queen Serenity had to sort of give up her child, right? We see grief in that Serena or Usagi, depending on which version you were introduced to, finds out that she's essentially adopted. And so there's a grief of identity there. And same with all the scouts as they start to have their memory come back. So sometimes I even equate that to some medical trauma when you have amnesia and now you're having memories come back. And seeing how all this happened during a war. So there's displacement. There is having to start lives in a new land, essentially. So multiple layers of grief in a 30-minute clip.
Yeah. And I think for me, when I think of grief, I know that not only does Sailor Moon fight opponents that have their own struggles and maybe have even experienced grief, and she's there to, be the compassionate person to hear them out and understand them as people before they are considered monsters, because a lot of them were transformed into those things because of, you know, the Dark Negaverse. But not only that,
So
my favorite Sailor Scout is Sailor Saturn, and she is actually the most kind of very different from all of the other Sailor Scouts, because she not only represents a planet, but she also has the opportunity to destroy planets, and she has the opportunity to reset things, because she symbolizes death, rebirth, and regeneration. And I think that was the first time that I've ever seen a show or, you know, any sort of story go that deep into the meaning of life, right? And I think that makes her more of a neutral guardian, because even though grief is something that is so hard to deal with and very tough to tackle, sometimes death leads to rebirth and something beautiful. And to find that silver lining in something so traumatic, something so difficult for people to understand, I think was very ambitious for, you know, essentially a kid show. But as I figured out, it was a manga that was very thought out, and had a lot of themes that in Japanese culture they do tackle. And it was very foreign for Westerners to hear about that. But I thought that really took my understanding and love for the story to the next level when they introduced a character who was basically symbolized by a little girl being so powerful to where, you know, she had the ability to end you or let you live.
That is so cool. As someone who never really got to experience Sailor Moon for all of its essence, like a couple of things that I'm hearing you both, Stefanie and Ariel, talk about is just how femininity was at the centerpiece of these stories. And one of the things that I don't want to forget to ask is, why does that matter? I guess like the cultural implications, the personal implications of what that show did for you as women at the time. Like, how did it soften you? Did it allow you to accept parts of yourself that you didn't otherwise accept before? The gentleness. You're good.
I think women and being a woman has so many facets. And as you grow in life, I'm a mother now. And as you grow in life, you experience all these things so intensely and in such a fast and slow way. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think seeing the mirror of these girls and what they go through, the relationships not only that they have with each other, but with their families. I mean, with Rei, how much she loves her grandfather, the relationship between Usagi and seeing her future child, which is something like you would not even think of when you're that age, looking at herself as a mother from, you know, all sorts of, you know, time jumps. I think, you know, it really encapsulated almost everything that it is to be a woman in different stages, because we go through such leaps in our timelines, and we feel things so deeply to where we're in tears like Usagi is almost all the time. We crave things. When I think of her loving food, that's a real hormonal thing that we go through. We really want to just enjoy something and like have that like euphoric bite of food in our mouth. And the struggles that she has with her relationships with men. I mean, her and Mamoru, they were always breaking up, getting back together, breaking up, and exploring like different versions of that. Yeah.
You know,
right,
like I feel like every show to keep the romantic dynamic, like from a mental health standpoint, like personally for me, I've had to really dissect that for myself, because I was like, oh my gosh, all of the media that I've watched growing up is always about, are we going to be together or not together? And it's really shaped the romantic view of, I would go as far as to say like romantic culture in today's society, where if there's not something spicy going on in your relationship, like something's wrong, you know? Like, what do you think about that?
I love how you mentioned that, because I have been together with my husband for almost 20 years now.
Wow.
And that was, a lot of it was like, oh, I'm always going to end up with the one. And when I look at Sailor Moon, they always ended up together no matter what. And I was just like, maybe this is a version of that. And that kind of it was like, I'm not even kidding. It was kind of
That's
like
so
a prayer.
cool.
Like maybe we were just destined to be together forever. And that's okay. Because I had friends who were in spicy relationships. I'm like, well, maybe that's not the path for me. Maybe it is something else. So yeah.
Yeah. Stefanie and Ariel too, because I know that you're also in a partnership, but like, what do you think it is about the way that spicy relationships are portrayed on the media that make it easy for someone to choose that? And then another second part to that question is like, what did you choose and why is that healthy for you? Because I don't want to go on to say that, one type of relationship is what everyone should choose.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of my dating history involved partners that in one way or another didn't know how to show up for me. And so some of them was, what our definition of monogamy was not the same. So they couldn't show up in that way. For others, it was the way in which I needed them to engage in social justice or how to conceptualize certain situations. And Steph has been with me and witnessed some of this. And I knew that those weren't things that I wanted, but I think also part of being raised and having a variety of relationships because my father was in the military, I also craved like having a stability or a secure base, right? What we say in attachment theory, someone that is my person I go to, that I ignored my needs, which made that base not secure, right? I would say that's really changed in my current relationship in ways that I don't think I could have predicted. Like, just this morning, he like lit a candle for me and like brought me coffee. Like, I don't even have to express the need, but I know that if I verbalized it, it would be heard and met. And those were things that I don't think I could have ever fathomed or imagined. And the only way that it was able to sort of like come to fruition was when I realized that, I'm allowed to have needs met, I'm allowed to vocalize them, and that my needs weren't a lot to ask for, like aligning on certain belief systems or having the ability to show up. And it took a lot of work to decide that that was important and available to me.
Wow. I'm very sensitive to people's stories, so I'm just taking in your story, Ariel. And I really appreciate your vulnerability because I can see so much of myself in that as well. But I don't want to take up too much space because I would love to hear your story too, Stefanie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always tell Ariel and everyone I meet when they hear about my relationship that I'm an anomaly. I am one of the few who either I am stubborn and both of us might be stubborn and just, or lazy and didn't want to find anyone else. Or we, it was just like written in the stars because I knew that me and my husband, since we've technically grown up together, we've gone through a lot of struggle of growing up together, finding a career, going through school, not going through school. He is also enlisted. So I deal with a lot of, times where I'm alone or times that we're apart for a very long time. Luckily, he is, stationed here in California. And, even though it was difficult, especially during the pandemic, because that's when I was having a baby from my first baby. We have learned to figure it out in such a way that it makes me a better friend to everyone else. I think I love the fact that my husband is willing to make mistakes with me and always know that we're really best friends. And I know that's like a super cliche thing and a lot of people say it, but I mean, he was right there fangirling over Sailor Moon with me when I rewatched it. I'm right there with him. We watch anime together. We go to Disneyland together. He dresses up with me. And we just like see eye to eye on that. And that's not to say that we have our moments, because Ariel knows we definitely have our moments where it's just like, we've been together for so long. You're like, why don't you just get it? Why can't you just read my mind at this point? But at the same time,
That's so real.
Yeah, to have a friend who Ariel does this so well, she brings me down and she's just like, he's he's still a person with flaws. And I'm like, you are absolutely right.
Made it to the end of the episode. I think you deserve a thank you. Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast, wouldn't be anything without followers like you. I promise you that the production of these podcasts will continue to increase as the listeners increase and the followers increase. And so if you can do me a favor, if you found any value from this podcast episode, please give this a like, share, or subscribe to the show. It really helps us out. It keeps the word going and it helps our impressions. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next Friday.